In the late 15th century, a determined sailor from Genoa named Christopher Columbus proposed an ambitious plan to the King of Portugal to discover new lands and riches by sailing westward. However, his proposal was dismissed as overly fanciful and prohibitively expensive. Undeterred, Columbus turned to Spain, where his timing proved fortuitous. By 1492, Spain had recently expelled the last Muslim rulers from its territory, and its monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, were eager to expand their influence. With resources available and impressed by Columbus's confidence, they agreed to sponsor his voyage. In August 1492, Columbus set sail across the Atlantic with three ships, the Niña, Pinta, and Santa Maria. After a 2-month journey fraught with challenges, he landed in the Bahamas in October. This marked the first significant European contact with the Americas, initiating a transformative era in world history. Columbus' voyages opened the door to European colonization of the Americas, leading to the establishment of new nations and immense wealth for European powers. However, this expansion came at a devastating cost to indigenous populations, who suffered catastrophic losses from disease, exploitation, and violence, consequences from which they never fully recovered. This narrative stems from what was originally intended as an exploration for an alternative route to the Far East, commonly referred to as the Indies. What prompted this significant drive for European expansion? Additionally, what were the initial 100 years like in the Americas? To comprehend this, it is essential to recognize the motivations behind European nations seeking Western routes. For centuries, Europe relied on the Silk Road for trade with the East. The Silk Road facilitated commerce among European nations, India, and China, allowing the exchange of goods such as tea, silk, spices, cotton, ivory, and precious metals. However, this trade was disrupted when the Ottoman Empire took control. The capture of Constantinople in 1453, now known as Istanbul, granted the Ottomans dominance over the western terminus of the Silk Road. This control resulted in significant tax increases on all goods traded along this renowned route, compelling Europe to search for alternative pathways to the east. During this period, the Portuguese emerged as leaders in maritime navigation, focusing on sending ships around Africa into the Indian Ocean. This strategy was in place until Christopher Columbus arrived on a beach in the Bahamas archipelago, presenting a new possibility. In 1493, Columbus embarked on his second voyage to the Americas, this time with a more defined purpose. His initial journey had involved just 3 ships, whereas his second expedition featured a fleet of 17 vessels, which included colonists, priests, and soldiers. They even brought along a group of intimidating Mastiff dogs to instill fear in the indigenous population. Columbus, however, did not seem particularly worried about potential resistance from the natives. In a telling entry from his 1492 diary, he expressed the belief that the Caribbean inhabitants would make excellent servants and could easily be converted to Christianity. He also observed that the natives appeared to be unarmed or at least unfamiliar with iron weaponry, such as swords. This observation greatly encouraged the Spanish authorities, leading to Columbus's subsequent mission in 1493 to establish a colony. A significant milestone in history occurred when Santo Domingo was established as the first official European settlement in the Americas. This colony was founded on the Caribbean island of Hispaniola, which is currently divided between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. As news reached Europe about the vast lands to the west, the Portuguese sought to participate in the exploration and colonization efforts. Spain, fully aware of Portugal's ambitions, recognized the potential challenge posed by Portuguese naval power to its own expansion in the New World. To prevent future disputes, Pope Alexander VI intervened in 1494, establishing a demarcation line in the Atlantic Ocean that extended from north to south. Territories located to the west of this line were designated for Spain, while those to the east were allocated to Portugal. Both nations consented to this arrangement and formalized it through the Treaty of Tordesillas. The demarcation line was approximately situated in the central Atlantic, about 2,000 kilometers west of the Cape Verde Islands, off the coast of West Africa. The overarching plan was for Spain to claim the new lands discovered by Columbus, while Portugal would focus on conquering territories in Africa and southern Asia. However, there was a notable exception. A significant portion of land in South America extended into Portugal's designated area. This detail was unknown to the Portuguese in 1500. He arrived on the northeastern coast of Brazil at Bahia. Recognizing that this territory was situated on Portugal's side of the demarcation line, Cabral claimed it for the crown. While many historians suggest that other Europeans may have visited the area prior to Cabral, he is widely regarded as the official discoverer of Brazil. Upon surveying Bahia, Cabral surmised that it was part of a larger continent. He promptly dispatched a ship back to Lisbon to share the news. The Portuguese were keen to explore any potential precious metals, particularly gold and silver, that Brazil might offer. However, when it became apparent that the only significant resource was local timber, their interest waned for several decades. The Brazil wood trees were valued for the red dye that could be extracted from them, which was used in textiles and clothing in Europe. The Portuguese enlisted the indigenous people to clear the forests, trading items such as mirrors, scissors, knives, and axes to facilitate this arrangement. From the outset, the Portuguese interaction with the indigenous population was notably different from the Spanish approach in Mexico and Central America. While Spanish colonization was characterized by direct conquest, Brazil lacked evident natural wealth. Consequently, Portugal initially opted to use the new territory as a trading post between Europe and India. Ultimately, it was determined that establishing a colony would be the most effective way to govern Brazil. In 1532, the first Portuguese settlement was founded in São Vicente, located on the mid-coast near present-day São Paulo. The land was divided into 15 captaincies, which were parcels granted to individuals for agricultural purposes. The recipients of these captaincies were nobles, merchants, or former sailors, and it quickly became clear that sugar was the primary crop to cultivate. Progress was initially slow. In 1549, Brazil was officially designated as a crown colony, with Salvador da Bahia established as its capital. This port colony was equipped with essential infrastructure, including a cathedral, hospital, prison, and customs house. During this time, Spain was engaged in an aggressive colonization effort across Central and South America. After settling in Hispaniola, the Spanish expanded their reach by colonizing Puerto Rico in 1508, Jamaica in 1509, and Cuba in 1511. In 1513, Vasco de Balboa became the first European to view the Pacific Ocean, having crossed the Isthmus of Panama and claimed the ocean as Spanish territory. The year 1519 marked a significant turning point for Spain. Hernán Cortés, an explorer based in Cuba, was eager to uncover new lands and riches for the Spanish crown. He had heard tales of the abundant gold and silver awaiting discovery in mainland Mexico. Thus, he embarked on an unauthorized expedition to Mesoamerica, landing on the Yucatan Peninsula in February 1519. His initial encounters were with the Mayan tribes, but he soon recognized that to dominate Mexico, he would need to confront the formidable Aztecs. The Aztecs, the most advanced civilization in the region at that time, were centered in their capital, Tenochtitlan, which would later evolve into Mexico City. The Spanish were confident in their prospects. They possessed advanced weaponry, including steel swords and firearms, along with well-organized military forces supported by horses and dogs. Additionally, they wielded a devastating biological weapon against the indigenous populations. Diseases, smallpox in particular, proved to be catastrophic, as the native tribes of the Americas had never encountered it and lacked any immunity. The impact of smallpox was swift and devastating for the Aztecs, and combined with their superior weaponry, the Spanish successfully captured Tenochtitlan in 1521. The Aztecs did not surrender easily. They fought valiantly until the end. However, they were ultimately devastated and succumbed to disease and the superior firepower of Spanish artillery. It is estimated that over 240,000 Aztec soldiers perished during the conflict, with more than half of those deaths attributed to illness. In the ensuing years, most of Mexico fell under Spanish control, prompting the Spanish to turn their attention southward to the Inca territories in Peru. This endeavor was no small challenge. By 1528, the Inca Empire was at its zenith, encompassing an impressive 1,800,000 square kilometers. In 1532, Francisco Pizarro led Spanish forces into Peru, where they engaged the Inca army in a struggle for dominance over the region. Despite being significantly outnumbered, Pizarro and his men capitalized on their advanced weaponry, resulting in the slaughter of thousands of Incas, who were ill-equipped to counter the European invaders' guns and swords. The Spanish advantage was further bolstered by the chaos of a civil war among Inca leaders, which had left their forces disorganized and vulnerable. Emperor Atahualpa was ultimately defeated, and Spain not only seized Peru, but also the surrounding Incan territories, effectively claiming nearly all of South America, with the exception of Brazil and Venezuela, which were under Portuguese control. Although Spain had explored Argentina in 1516, they were unimpressed by the region's resources and did not establish a formal settlement until 1580. In 1537, Spanish troops advanced into Colombia, and by 1841, they had taken control of Chile. Spain also began to expand its influence into North America. In 1559, Tristan de Luna y Arellano founded a settlement in present-day Pensacola, Florida. Subsequently, in 1565, the Spanish established a colony in San Augustine, Florida, near modern Jacksonville. Throughout the 16th century, the Spanish gradually expanded into what would later become the southern United States, including regions such as Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, California, and Arizona. This indicates that Spain had successfully claimed vast territories across two continents. Britain and France were fully aware of these developments. Both European powers recognized the Treaty of Tordesillas between Spain and Portugal, but chose to ignore it entirely. Neither nation was accountable to the Pope, and both were convinced of their entitlement to seize opportunities in the New World. France was the first to embark on a significant exploration initiative. In 1534, King Francis I dispatched Jacques Cartier on the first of 3 voyages to North America. Cartier navigated the coast of Newfoundland and ventured along the St. Lawrence River. In July 1534, France became the 3rd European nation to officially set foot in the Americas. Cartier arrived at the Gaspé Peninsula in Quebec, where he erected a cross in the sand, claiming the territory for the French crown. However, this endeavor to establish New France was short-lived. Cartier also attempted to found a colony in what is now Quebec City in 1541, but the venture failed due to conflicts with indigenous tribes and severe weather conditions. Subsequent French efforts to establish colonies further down the North American coast included attempts at Parris Island in South Carolina in 1562 and in present-day Jacksonville, Florida in 1564. These initiatives were hindered by Spanish attacks as Spain grew increasingly anxious about the potential for French colonization in North America. In 1598, France made a lackluster attempt to create a convict colony on Sable Island off Nova Scotia, but this too did not come to fruition. The early French endeavors were inadequately funded and lacked the necessary support for successful colonization. Coupled with ongoing conflicts with local tribes and harsh climatic conditions, France had little to show for its efforts by the conclusion of the 16th century. Significant transformations were occurring in England, which was preparing to assert its presence on the global stage. With a robust and established navy, England aimed to amass considerable wealth. Upon ascending to the throne in 1558, Queen Elizabeth was poised for action. She authorized British ships to attack and plunder Spanish vessels returning from the Americas laden with treasure, and also supported expeditions to the Caribbean. When these efforts met with fierce retaliation from the Spanish, Elizabeth and her government shifted their focus to the North American coastline. In 1584, the daring explorer Walter Raleigh received a charter to investigate North America. The decision to empower Raleigh was driven by both economic interests and ideological motives. Elizabeth recognized the vast potential for colonization in North America and sought to challenge the influence of Spanish Catholicism in the area. In 1585, Raleigh organized an expedition to establish a settlement on Roanoke Island, located off the coast of North Carolina. From the beginning, the Roanoke colony faced significant challenges, and when a supply ship returned from England after 2 years, it was discovered that the settlement had been deserted. The enigma of Roanoke continues to intrigue historians, with some theorizing that the colonists integrated with local Native Americans, while others suggest that they may have perished. Nevertheless, Britain remained undeterred and began planning another expedition to the eastern coast of America. During the early phases of European colonization, interactions with indigenous populations varied greatly. Some settlers managed to forge relatively amicable relationships, while others encountered conflict from the outset. Overall, Europeans generally viewed themselves as a superior race, believing it was their duty to civilize and educate the indigenous peoples. The Spanish were particularly swift in enslaving the local populations upon their arrival in Hispaniola in the Caribbean, a practice they continued as they expanded into Mexico. Captured natives were quickly forced into labor, and as diseases began to ravage local populations, the Spanish turned their attention to West Africa. The British shared a similar perspective, viewing their presence as a means to colonize and extract resources. If the indigenous people opposed this, it was deemed their issue. This mindset resulted in frequent violent confrontations during the early stages of colonization. While the French later showcased the advantages of forming alliances with local communities, the British, Spanish, and Portuguese primarily focused on conquest, leading to often brutal interactions between colonizers and natives. The colonists possessed superior weaponry, while the natives had a profound understanding of their environment. Religion also played a significant role in these dynamics. In both South and North America, natives were pressured to adopt Christianity, with missionaries sent to convert the indigenous populations. Many Europeans failed to recognize that the native peoples had their own established cultures and belief systems. Some Spanish missionaries, however, spent considerable time with the natives, developing empathy and a deeper understanding of their struggles. Pope Paul III, upon reviewing the missionaries' correspondence, cautioned colonists that the indigenous people were not mere beasts to be exterminated or enslaved, but human beings with souls deserving of salvation. This perspective was quite progressive for the era, suggesting that while Christianity was viewed as the sole path forward, colonists should at least acknowledge the suffering of the natives. Nevertheless, the initial encounters between the two groups must have been profoundly shocking, as neither had ever encountered anything like the other, resulting in a wide range of emotions from curiosity to disdain and fear. Some settlers recognized that forming alliances with the indigenous populations would be advantageous for them. The local tribes possessed a deeper understanding of the land, which allowed the settlers to acquire knowledge about farming and hunting practices. When the British first established a settlement at Roanoke in 1585, they developed a rapport with the Algonquin people. The Algonquins taught the settlers effective agricultural techniques and guided them to sources of food. This relationship was so beneficial that many believed the struggling settlers might have chosen to integrate with the Algonquins. Nevertheless, regardless of the industries that their colonies were founded upon, all European powers required labor. As the workload became overwhelming for the settlers and diseases decimated the enslaved indigenous population, the colonists began to import slaves from West Africa. Consequently, after the initial century of American colonization, Spain emerged as the dominant power in terms of territorial expansion and wealth accumulation, having established colonies stretching from Buenos Aires to Florida and Texas. However, France was poised to exert significant influence, while England was just beginning its endeavors. In North America, substantial transformations were imminent.